I've posted very little on my channel over the last year, which has led to many comments and messages asking me where I went and if I was okay. So I'm just going to tell the story of what happened, how it changed my life, and by extension, my channel. I've known that I was going to make this video for the last year, but I have been totally dreading it, to be honest. But this will answer any questions for those who have asked and happen to care. And more importantly, I think telling this story will be a very cathartic experience for me. I will start my story by rewinding us back to the spring of 2021. In the spring of 2021, myself and my then girlfriend moved back to our hometown after many years away. I just want to show where April and I are now living currently. Since we left Seattle, we are now in Port Townsend, and we have a temporary setup. We are living at our friend's house. We are renting this upstairs space from them. That's about all there is to show, because that's as big as our place is. This was not really where I wanted to be at this point in my life, but I was becoming a bit concerned about my dad's health, so it seemed like the right move. A little backstory on my dad. My dad was a highly skilled builder and a pretty eccentric dude with some very ambitious ideas. In 1995, he bought a piece of property in our hometown and began building his dream home. It was a massive, outrageous vision that he worked on by himself for 27 years. Yes, you heard me right. 27 years with no end in sight. My dad and his house is a whole story all by itself, so I'm not going to go deep into any of that in this video. I do plan to do a video about it in the future, though. I will say that it's always been very difficult to explain the size and scope of my father's vision for his house to someone who couldn't go and see it for themselves. Because of this, some years ago, I created a YouTube video about it in an attempt to make it easier to understand. There is a link to that video in the description below if you're interested in learning more. I will also say that throughout those 27 years, my dad was funding this project on credit cards, which unfortunately began a cycle of debt and credit card balance transfers that he would struggle with for the rest of his life. After coming back to town, I was doing YouTube and cash work for friends for income. Despite his mountain of debt, my dad had recently secured a pretty sizable loan and was paying me to help him work on his house. A job I would have gladly done for free, of course, but he always insisted on paying. About a year into working with him, his money suddenly dried up and he seemed much less motivated to work on his house as he had been in the past. Then, in October of 2022, he told me he had been diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer and that it had spread to other organs. This was a devastating blow that I, of course, did not see coming. In the weeks that followed, he began aggressive treatments and kept a generally positive attitude, but he started to decline rapidly. 8 months later, my father passed on Thursday, August 17th of 2023. I was lucky enough to get to sit with him for a couple hours that day before he left for the other side. Through most of his building career, my dad had been a member and a staunch supporter of the Carpenters Union. He retired from the union in the mid-2000s, and for the years that followed, he and his wife had been living off his retirement money, which was enough for them to be comfortable and afford to make payments on the credit cards he had been using to fund his dream home project. Unfortunately, though, these monthly payments would not be supporting his widow after his death. As it turns out, my father had many years ago made the extremely strange decision that when he passed, he wanted the entirety of his retirement fund to be donated to the Carpenters Union to help support them. So his wife was left with a mountain of debt, little income, and a gigantic unfinished house that she would most certainly lose. This sent her into panic mode and she immediately started having estate sales. My dad had amassed a huge hoard of tools and building materials along with a massive amount of mostly worthless junk. The next few months were a stressful affair as we dug through and attempted to organize the hoards, selling everything off for basically whatever people would pay for it. In the end, this didn't do much for the financial situation, but it did buy some time. I should mention here that yes, for a moment the house did go up for sale, but everyone who came to look at it was immediately scared away by the amount of work and money it would take to finish it. I should also mention that my dad did offer to sign it over to me, but I respectfully declined since I have no real building skills and would prefer not to spend the rest of my life working on his massive, never-ending project house. During this whole year, my activity on YouTube really slowed down. For some creative people, when they're going through something heavy, they just dive into their art or their creative endeavors, and unfortunately, I am the exact opposite. All of the worrying about my dad had me down and unmotivated to work on videos. And then after he passed, all of my energy went into getting through the mess he had left behind. Had I not been so wrapped up in all of this, I maybe wouldn't have been so totally blindsided by the next part of my story. After many years together, my girlfriend and I parted ways. I won't get into any details about this because I have a very public platform here to speak on, and she does not, so that wouldn't be very cool. I will say that this was not something I wanted at all, and so it was pretty devastating. This turned into one of those life-altering start over from absolute zero moments for me. She moved out of the place we were sharing, and after I paid for my final month's rent and bills, I was completely tapped.
Here's what's going down. I am here in, my bedroom now. This was myself and April's bedroom. But, so anyways, we have in the last just over a week broken up, and I'm totally sick, part heartbroken. I have no idea what I'm doing now. Like, literally no fucking clue at all. Just total devastation.
I'd been making some money from YouTube and random video licensing over the last few years, but now that I hadn't been uploading so much, my views sunk way down and my payments literally went to like almost nothing. Also, the cash work I was doing with my friend had entered the slow season, so we were not working nearly as much. Once again, I'm not going to go into any details here as to why, but I left this relationship with basically nothing, except for like my personal possessions. I didn't even have a vehicle to drive. I believe after I paid the final month's rent and bills at the place that we had been staying, and then paid a couple other random things, I'm pretty sure I had about $500 to my name total. And yes, I could have secured some goofball job and stayed at the place we had shared, but no way. I needed a full-on clean slate and desperately wanted to get out of town. Since I was already going to my dad's and helping his wife almost daily, she suggested I just stay there and help out until I get things figured out. The only real space available was the basement though, which had the potential to be pretty depressing. I moved in on January 1st, 2024. Here's what the basement looked like that night when I arrived. Add to this that the basement had no windows, so I would not be getting any sunlight. Depressing stuff indeed. Life as I had known it for many years was now turned completely upside down, and it was hard to get my bearings. First thing I did was force myself to fully accept that this was my life now and there was no going back to what I knew before. Next, I set out to make the space I was going to be occupying as comfortable and as inspiring as possible, and to do this, I got out my blacklight and my old posters. As I said before, my creative drive had almost totally left me, so I thought if I set up my space like the bedrooms I had when I was a hyper-creative teenager or the apartment I occupied when I was single and thriving, this would help kickstart some happier feelings and hopefully inspire some creativity.
Here is my temporary space in the basement, now fully dialed in. This is where I've been staying. It's still weird, but it's not a depressing hellhole like it was before. And it's just temporary, so chill out.
On the TV, I stayed away from the news of the world and I only played upbeat music videos and funny sitcoms. I started a little workout routine, and I also put on YouTube videos of the outdoors in the summertime every morning to help wake me up and battle the lack of sunlight. I was completely broke at this point, so I decided to throw a Hail Mary and attempt to get a credit card. I had decent credit, so I called up American Express and made up some lies about having a job and how much I was being paid. To my absolute shock, they approved me for a card with a $4,000 limit. Now I needed to start reimagining my life and figuring out what I was going to do next. For about a year before we broke up, my ex and I had been planning to get an RV and hit the road to warmer climates during the depressing Pacific Northwest winter months. We had even acquired the perfect RV for our travels.
Cheers, guys.
Woo!
What are those
RV people.
Are those?
This was something I definitely still wanted to do, so I set my intention on somehow finding a little RV for myself. My dream RV was the 1980s Toyota Dolphin. They just had such a cool retro style. They're small enough to park in regular parking spaces, and depending on the year and how it's maintained, the Toyota trucks they were built on will run forever. I had a few leads, but everything was way out of my price range, which, let's be honest, was almost nothing at this point. In a weird the universe will provide type twist, a good friend of mine happened to have the exact year and style I was looking for just sitting in her backyard. It was pretty struggled out and needed a lot of work, but she gave it to me for a good price and let me make payments. As I said before, I had no transportation except my bike. My dad's old 1988 Ford Ranger was looking pretty beat up but still ran, so I took it to a friend's house, cleaned it up as best I could, and started driving it. Well, of course, after about 1 week, it broke down and left me stranded by the side of the road. And on the very day that I was on my way to go have a look at the Dolphin RV for the first time. All right, so this is totally awesome. Here I am in my dad's truck, and now I'm dead by the side of the road, so it's just getting better today. And I was on my way to go see the RV that I'm looking to get. Now I'm just stuck here. All right, I'll just be hanging out here. So the first big charge on my brand new credit card was getting my dad's truck fixed. It was just over 2 weeks before I would get the truck back from the shop, and I have to say those were the hardest and most depressing 2 weeks of my entire life, without a doubt. Snow came and iced over everything, so bike riding wasn't really happening. On top of this, the main water line at my dad's house froze, so we had no running water for about a week. I was pretty much grounded to wait it out in my dad's basement and just sit there with my grief and sadness. To be honest, even though this period was terribly hard, this was exactly what I needed. When it comes to grief or heartbreak or any other terrible time like that, for me, the way out is always through. I think most people would try to find things to keep their mind occupied or stay distracted, or even worse, get into a new relationship. But myself, I would rather sit alone and face all of my painful feelings head on and just work through them. It's way more intense pain right up front, but definitely fast tracks the healing process, at least for me. I did try to work on videos during this period, but digging through my archives to find stuff to post or talk about, it would always just lead to seeing videos of me and my ex when we were together and happy and having fun, or videos of my dad when he was healthy and enjoying life and working. So I couldn't dig around in my archives. I had to just stay away from that totally. I just stayed isolated, facing my feelings head on, and just waiting for the day that I could bring the RV home, start working on it, and begin to plan my escape. I will mention that during this period, I stayed away from alcohol because, as we know, isolation, depression, and booze, not a good mixture. About a month later, I was able to bring the RV to my dad's and begin working on it. This was really good for me because I had a goal that required a physical process to reach it. I quickly became obsessed with working on the RV, which also took away from working on videos, but this was much more important to me. For money during this whole period, I was doing paint work with my friend whenever it was available, then spent all of my other free time on the RV. This really helped, but it still ended up being the longest, most miserably depressing winter I've ever experienced. The Pacific Northwest is beautiful and all, but the long, gray winters can really mess with you if you're not in a good place mentally or emotionally. I made a promise to myself during this period that I would finish this project and spend the next winter in a warmer climate. There was one very positive break during my dark winter of the soul period. After hearing about my situation, some dear friends of mine in San Diego bought me a round-trip plane ticket and had me come stay with them for a full month just to get away. They even set me up with my own little studio area and a vehicle to drive while I was there. And they didn't even get mad when I accidentally annihilated a car in the Trader Joe's parking garage with the front of their Jeep. Oops.
Here's where I totally blew it. Ugh. Ding dong. Everything's fine.
We had a lot of fun, and being able to escape the damp dreariness and spend some time in the sun was exactly what I needed. I also randomly made a new friend while I was there, and we totally tore shit up. I can't even express how healing this trip was for me. When I got home and spring finally came around, I had another physical task that would prove to be good for me. My dad had built a series of temporary scaffolding around his house so he could work on the outside. At the time he built it, he said it would only be up for 6 months. Nearly 10 years later, it was now a treacherous, rotting death trap that needed to be removed.
This is what I'm going to be taking apart. Let's go up and take a look at just how treacherous this is. And as you can see, everything is basically rotting. Here's how high we are.
There were many moments throughout that first year after my father passed that I found myself feeling very angry at him for leaving behind such a huge mess for us to clean up. Tearing apart the scaffolding and throwing the used lumber around ended up being a very cathartic physical experience that allowed me to get some of these feelings out. By the end of summer, I had the RV road ready and livable for the most part, although it took me way longer than I thought it would to get it to this condition. I see now that I was being blindly optimistic about what it would take to get this RV on the road again, and many of my friends did try to warn me. But once I get locked in and determined to accomplish something, it's pretty impossible to throw me off target. In November, I left my dad's place in the Dolphin just as the dismal winter weather was creeping in and drove it 1,300 miles to Southern California. I have a vlog documenting this journey on my channel if you'd like to see how it went down. And you would like to see, so go watch it as soon as you're done with this. Which now brings me to the changes to my channel. If you're a regular watcher, you know that I post vintage vlogs from the 1980s, 1990s, and some of the 2000s also. For many years, though, I've received messages and comments from people asking if I would please do vlogs of my current life. But I just never really felt super inspired or motivated to do that. But now that I've transitioned into this sort of RV life, van life thing, whatever you want to call it, I'm feeling like documenting adventures again and uploading new vlogs to my channel. It probably won't be as much of the quiet, simple life that you see in other RV life vlogs on YouTube. I'm guessing there'll be a bit more drunkenness, drama, and shenanigans compared to those other vlogs, but I gotta stay true to me, right? And yes, I'll still be doing my 80s and 90s vintage videos if that's your bag. So right now, I'm just chilling out in Southern California, getting a bunch of fun new video ideas together and getting back into uploading. My dad's widow has been able to just barely hold on to the house, and she's determined to stay there until she dies, and she's doing good. I'm taking 6 months away from my dad's place and my hometown to reset, do some traveling, and regroup. So what have I learned from this last year and a half? After some distance and some time to reflect, I can see where I went wrong. My mistake was reluctantly agreeing to go back to our hometown when that is not where I wanted to be at that time in my life. I should have pushed back and said, this is a step backwards for us, let's figure out something else. But I wanted her to be happy, and it seemed like the right thing to do because of my dad's health. Ultimately, though, this led to the end of our relationship. At least from my point of view. But what did I actually learn? I learned that by saying yes to something that I did not want to do, I was no longer being my most authentic self, and this led to a lot of pain. There was one gift in this pain, though, and that was that I had no idea that these were going to be the last years of my father's life. And I did get to spend a lot of quality time with him all the way up until the day he died. For this, I feel very grateful. And from my father's passing, I learned something else, or at least was reminded of something that I had forgotten over time, and that is that I could die at any moment. My dad sat down his tools after working one day, thinking he'd be back tomorrow to pick up where he left off. And that never happened. Since my life could end at any moment, I'm sure as fuck not going to spend it working my ass off just to pay rent and a ridiculous car payment as my actual soul slowly dies, waiting for the day I can retire and finally have some fun. Especially since there's no guarantee I'm even going to live that long. And what kind of shape physically am I going to be in then? Fuck that. I want to meet strange and interesting people and have a life full of experiences while I still can. As for all the personal stuff that I went through over the last year and a half, I'm happy to report that everything's fine, everyone's good and has moved on, and I'm fully back on my bullshit. Having my entire life completely burned to the ground and restart at zero has allowed me to, for better or worse, come back to my most unapologetically authentic self. This is now my movie and I'm the main character. You all are invited to come along and watch if you'd like. And with that, we will put an end to this therapy session and get back to some serious fun shit. Now go watch the videos I linked in the description. Good talk, you guys.